Hello and welcome to The View Literature Style. I'm Jen.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Meredith.
And I'm Natalie.
And today we're going to be analyzing the book, The Scarlet Letter, and here's a overall synopsis of what happens.
The story begins in 17th century Boston. A young woman, Hester Prynne, is led from the town prison with her infant daughter Pearl in her arms and the scarlet letter A on her breast. While waiting for her husband to return from seas, Hester has apparently had an affair as she has given birth to a child. She will not reveal her lover's identity, and the scarlet letter, along with her public shaming, is her punishment for her sin and her secrecy. On this day, Hester is led to the town scaffold, but she again refuses to identify her child's father. Isolated from the community, Hester does not let the Puritans' cruelness affect her life. She refuses to let the intentions of everything the A is supposed to be dictate how she lives. She persists to be her graceful self in everything the Puritans are not. Through compassion and good integrity, Hester continues to care for the sick, treat others well, and live a charitable life. The Puritans began to pass over their strict ways as they say that Hester's A stands for Abel. Hester leaves after the death of her lover Dimmesdale. Many years later, Hester returns alone, still wearing the scarlet letter, to live in her old cottage and resume her charitable work. She receives occasional letters from Pearl, who has married a European aristocrat and established a family of her own. When Hester dies, she is buried next to Dimmesdale. The two share a single tombstone, which bears the scarlet letter A.
Okay, so the Puritans as a character are a very interesting group. The Puritans' silent judgment of others leads to their internal downfall within the Scarlet Letter. The Puritans' behaviors are influenced by their beliefs, and they're shaped by their religion, their relationships, and the community with others. The Puritans are motivated by, once again, their religious beliefs, and they obtain a very strict and stubborn outlook on life because of their commitment to following the Bible. And in the book, we can really tell what Hawthorne's view of the Puritans is, because he really makes them out to be sort of like the enemies.
The bad guys.
Yeah. So now we'll go to the first episode, which is when Hester had to face the women that were hating on her. In The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne uses the hypocritical nature of the Puritans and the changing meaning of the A to show that rules and customs lose significance as time goes on.
"Ladies," said one hard-faced woman of 50, "I'll give you a piece of my mind. It would serve the public good if mature church-going women like us were allowed to deal with hussies like Hester Prynne. What do you say, ladies? If the five of us passed judgment on this girl, would she have gotten off as lightly as she did? I don't think so."
This specific example, which can be found on pages 44 to 45, shows how harsh that the Puritans judge. They don't like when someone doesn't follow their rules, and Hester becomes sort of like their scapegoat. And the public nature of her punishment makes her an object for judgment, as seeing the pain and distress of Hester satisfies the Puritans. This also shows how Hawthorne feels about the Puritan religion. He doesn't hold back in making the Puritan society as harsh and cruel as he perceived it to be. This example also gives the townspeople, particularly the women, a chance to convince themselves of their own pureness in the eyes of God by condemning her as publicly and ostentatiously as possible. Rather than seeing their own potential sinfulness in Hester, the townspeople see her as someone whose transgressions outweigh their own errors. So yeah, this is like one of the first times that we really see how the Puritans behave and act towards people who don't abide by their rules. So on to episode 2.
For the prisoner, this was a long walk. As confident as she may have seemed, Hester would have felt every step of every person in the crowd as though they had landed on her heart. But human nature blesses us with this strange and merciful quirk. In our moments of suffering, we don't realize how much we hurt. It's only afterward that we feel the worst pain. So almost serene composure.
In this example, which can be found on page 48, it shows how the Puritans really isolated Hester from the rest of their society. This, once again, shows the evil within the Puritan religion. They are so scared of the judgment that is to come after they die that they are obsessed with not engaging in any interaction with anyone that might threaten their faith. They punish Hester for her sin without realizing the sin they are committing themselves, hypocrisy. They shame Hester without realizing how they are unforgiving, cruel, and demeaning. It is as though they have no mercy in embarrassing her. The Puritans choose to ignore their internal conflict because it is for their benefit alone. The Puritans condemn her for her sin, even though they are sinners themselves. The Bible states that a sin is a sin, and all sins are equal to each other. However, the Puritans consider Hester's sin the worst of all, even though they're sinning as well. Forgetting their own sins and everything, and just only punishing Hester for hers, is what creates their dual hypocritical nature. So, on episode 3.
No one was as willing as Hester was to give what little she had to the poor. When disease swept through the town, no one was more devoted to the sick than Hester. The Puritans refused to recognize the A for its original meaning, as it stood for able.
Example, which can be found on page 144, it represents how the Puritans became more accepting of the A. There was a major change in the attitude of the Puritan community when they started to acknowledge that the A stood for able. Hester's position in the eyes of the Puritans has changed due to her grace and charity throughout the novel. The Puritans became less adamant and used this more as a sign of guilt. The Puritans began to look at the Scarlet Letter not as a sin, but as a symbol of the many good deeds she had done. That allows the audience to analyze the transformations the Puritans are making. Hawthorne uses the Puritans as a prime example to show that over time rules, punishments, and customs become less significant. Since Hester did not stoop down after being punished with the A, the Puritans are beginning to forget how they despised Hester for her sin. On to episode 4.
Hester Prynne had returned to take up her long-abandoned shame. For the rest of Hester's life, there was evidence that someone far away cared for her. She received letters affixed with seals of nobility. The gifts were expensive, though thoughtful, too.
In this scene, which can be found on page 238, Hester leaves Boston, and the A takes on a life of its own as she becomes a legend in the Puritan society. Her benevolent nature formed her reputation from one of contempt to one of reverence. She became a model to the Puritan people that one's sins do not have to define the acts of the rest of one's life. With that, this relates back to our claim about how rules lose their significance. Upon return, the Puritans did not shame her like they would have once before. That alone shows how much they have grown over time. It shows that once they acknowledged that the A Hester wore upon her chest meant so much more than adultery, their customs for how they treated Hester have changed. Now on to episode 5.
And after many years, a new grave was dug near an old and sunken one in the burial yard beside which King's Chapel was later built. It was close to that old and sunken grave, but separated a space, as if two of the dust eternal sleepers had no right to mix. Yet one tombstone was carved for two.
In this episode, Hester has died and the Puritans bury her in the King's Chapel graveyard, a burial place for well-respected Puritans. The significance of this action is that the A that Hester wears has been destigmatized to some degree. Due to her charitable work and good deeds, the Puritans have now recognized that she is an upstanding member of their community. She's buried next to Dimmesdale, but far away enough to suggest that the two never should have interacted in the first place. By the time of Hester's death, the meaning of the A has become ambiguous. Although to some it denotes respect, it will always be an indication of what the Puritan society identifies as a sin.
So, the 5 main points that we just reviewed kind of prove, well, not kind of, okay, sorry, I'll start over. The 5 main episodes that we just went over prove our claim that in the Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne uses the hypocritical nature of the Puritan society and the changing meaning of the A to show that rules and customs lose significance as time goes on. So first we started with the women that were hating on Hester before the scaffold scene, and that's when the Puritans were at their like typical hateful sin, unforgiving.
It was before their transformation.
Yeah, that was the beginning, and then also when they isolated her from the community, and then the first time we start to see them change is when they call her Abel, and then the 4th one when Hester comes back, and then the 5th one when Hester dies. So that's kind of overall the transformation of the Puritan society throughout the story. So thanks for watching. Tune in next week. I'm Jen.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Meredith.
And I'm Natalie.